Hi, I'm Sharon Winsmith, a tax attorney, active investor, and your go-to resource for proven investment and tax planning strategies. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about a very important concept called umbrella insurance. This is very important for anyone who already has wealth or is thinking about how you can build wealth and achieve financial freedom. You are going to need to understand umbrella insurance, and at some point in your life, if you don't already have a policy, you're going to need to think about purchasing one. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what umbrella insurance is. I'll explain to you who needs to get an umbrella insurance policy and why you need one. And then at the end, I'll share some tips for you to think about when you're working with an agent to get a policy for yourself. So to start with, I know that I say umbrella and I know I say insurance, very funny. People always make fun of the way I say both of those words. So I've been kind of terrified to record this video because it combines the two words that I always say that people make fun of me about. So don't, hit me up in the comments making fun of the way I say umbrella or insurance. So let's go ahead and start with what umbrella insurance is. So this is actually a policy that is going to provide an extra layer of protection on top of all of your other insurance policies. So this is my great graphic. I know I'm not a great artist, but this is put together to kind of illustrate how it works. So it's called umbrella because it is itself an umbrella above all of your other policies. So, and it can be, all different types of policies. So from your auto policy, from your, workers' comp policy, if you have a business, professional liability, if you have special events policy that you bought for, a wedding for your child or something like that, renter's policy, if you're someone who rents an apartment, if you are homeowners, if you own your home, condo, if you're a landlord and you're owning rental properties, there's all different types of insurance that you could have. And what happens is that umbrella insurance sits on top of all of those policies, and it is going to kick in and apply once the liability from these other policies that are triggered from whatever the event is that created the accident is exceeded. So if I have a car accident and, first I'm going to go after my auto policy and they're going to pay out whatever they would have paid out. Let's say I exceed that for whatever reason because it was a really bad accident. Then my umbrella policy is going to kick in. So you're going to always go first to the first level policy that applies. And once that is exceeded, if the accident is bad enough, then your umbrella insurance policy comes into play. So it really sits above these policies and acts as an extra layer of protection for you against any really bad accidents. One thing I'll mention is that usually you would split your personal and business policy. So let's say you're a business owner, you're probably going to have two umbrella insurance policies if you think you need it on the business side. So your personal policy would apply for your auto, for your, homeowners, for special events, things like that are personal in nature. And then you would have a separate policy that would apply for your business. So that would apply for things like, your general business liability insurance, workers' comp, professional liability, things like that. So if you're a business owner, you might be looking at two different types of umbrella policies. So that's one thing I did want to make sure I point out. Let's talk a little bit about who needs an umbrella insurance policy. So I think there's a lot of people out there who think that this is just for wealthy people. Well, that's actually not the case. Yes, if you have a lot of money, so anyone with significant net worth, and by significant net worth, that's subjective to what that might mean to different people. But, some people would say a couple 100,000. Some people would say, $1 million or so plus. If you've got a net worth that you're, worried about losing, because, you need to look at what the amounts in your policies could cover. So if your auto insurance only goes up to 500,000, then, if you've got a net worth of 750, you're not covered, right? You can also have situations where maybe your auto policy wouldn't apply and an umbrella could kick in. But if you've got significant net worth, especially above the policy limits that you have, then yes, you need to think about an umbrella insurance policy. Think about how litigious this country is, in the US. Think about, are you someone that is exposed to risk? Do you drive? I personally don't own a car, so I don't drive that much. But are you someone who drives a lot? Things that really, do you have children that drive, cars that you own? So you've got to think about where you're exposed to risk, how much risk you're exposed to, and, how much money people could sue you for, and whether or not your policies have you covered above, the net worth that you have. The second thing, and this is really important, is that you need to think about umbrella even if you don't have money now, but you are a high earner. So say you're a doctor, lawyer, business owner, who is someone who might not be making a lot of money yet or have accumulated a lot of money, but you certainly, have a high salary or will soon, then you need to think about an umbrella insurance policy. And I'm going to talk to you in a little bit more about why that is. So why do you need an umbrella insurance policy? You think, I'm covered from every risk I have. I've got my car insurance, I've got my business insurance, I've got my special events when I have a wedding or an event at my home or something. Well, there's always unexpected large liability. So you could have a car accident, and this happens all the time in practice, where the accident, maybe it's a multi-car accident that you caused, and maybe, worst case scenario, there's some deaths or really bad injuries. You could exceed your auto insurance limits really quickly. You'd be surprised at how quickly those can be exceeded. So you can actually have large liabilities that are way above, what you expected. Think about your business insurance. Yes, those sometimes have large policy limits, but let's say you've got a lot of employees. Just think about what could go wrong, and you want to plan for that. So you can always have large liabilities that exceed your policy limits, even though you think you're covered. And the good thing about umbrella insurance policy is it's going to kick in once those policy limits and the other policies are exceeded. Also, this is very important. This is what I was alluding to before. High earners need to watch out for this, or just anyone who thinks that they're covered. Lawsuits don't just target current assets. So this is why, yes, if you've got a bunch of net worth now, you could be sued and they could come after that and take that away from you. But they also can target future earnings. So just because, I might not have a bunch of money now, for example, let's say, I'm a doctor and I'm just starting out, got all this debt I've got to pay back from medical school. Well, maybe I'm making $300,000-$400,000 a year pretty quickly, once I start working, and, someone sues me. Well, I could think, well, I don't really own any assets, so what can they get? Well, you can still be on the hook for liability from that lawsuit, and you could be, on the hook to pay that off with your future earnings. So you've got to watch out for that. That umbrella insurance is not just a factor of how much net worth you have. It's really earnings and earning potential. If you don't have a lot of money and you don't make a lot of money, chances are good that a lawyer is probably not going to take that case against you. But if you're someone who's a doctor, yeah, you're going to be, a lawyer, a business owner, someone who, has good earning potential in the future. There are going to be lawyers lining up to take that case against you if they think that there's the ability that those lawsuits could be paid from future proceeds in the next few years. Also, a big thing about insurance policies, especially umbrella insurance policies, is that they pay out legal defense costs. So I might be sued for something, and it might be a crazy lawsuit. I worry about this all the time because people, would watch one of my videos and do something stupid and try to sue me. They would never win that lawsuit. And at the end of the day, they would, end up being countersued by me or, in a similar fact pattern. But I've got to pay out the defense costs. So I've got to hire some attorney. I mean, I could probably defend the lawsuit myself in some cases, but if you weren't a lawyer, you have to hire a defense attorney, and you've got to pay defense attorneys. They don't work on, pro bono, and they certainly don't work, on contingencies like plaintiffs' attorneys do. So the policies will pay out and, pay for that lawsuit. In most cases, they'll do what they call subrogating the lawsuit or the claim, where they'll step in your shoes and defend that lawsuit for you and on your behalf. So a lot of cases, those legal defense costs will eat against your liability limits on the other policies. So that could make your policy liability limit exceeded pretty quickly because of the legal defense costs and how expensive that is. And your umbrella insurance is then going to kick in and start paying those legal defense costs. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about it. It's not just what am I sued for at the end of the day and what's the claim that the person who sued me gets against me, the judgment that the court renders. It's also the legal defense costs, which are high. Legal defense attorneys, especially good ones, are very, very expensive. You're talking $500 an hour minimum, and you're paying for every minute that they're working or thinking about your case. So watch out for that. That's a big part of insurance policies and making sure you have the right limits and coverages. So this is big, and people don't understand this, I think, enough, is that there are gaps in every single insurance policy, from your car insurance to your business insurance to your umbrella insurance policy. There are gaps, and those gaps are huge. And when the minute you file a claim, that insurance company that you filed the claim with is going to go to work to do every single thing humanly possible that they can to get out of paying you out on that policy. So you need to have coverage for gaps. You need to understand what those gaps are, and you need to have coverage. So a good thing about umbrella insurance, and keep in mind your umbrella insurance policy has gaps itself. It doesn't cover 100%. There's always going to be things that you could do that you'll not be covered. So you need to understand that and understand what those limits are. But the umbrella insurance is an extra layer. If there is some gap, that didn't apply for your car insurance, for example, then hopefully the umbrella insurance would kick in and apply. So it's kind of an extra layer that could step in, hopefully in most cases, if there is a gap in the underlying policy itself. So that's really who needs a policy and who should think about getting one and how to think about it. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about some tips around getting a policy. So this is very important. I talk a lot, and I know sometimes that I can be very hard on service providers like CPAs, lawyers. I can tell you that the same thoughts that I have about the financial advisory industry and CPAs apply to insurance agents. I think that there's a lot of misaligned interests when you're working with an agent. I think there's a lot that they don't understand, that they don't understand your business or your situation in the same way that they should to really advise you. So again, you need to focus on this. You don't just go out and get your policy and think you're done. This is very important. It is probably, I think, the area where I focus a lot of my time on that I hate. I hate everything about insurance. It's so boring to me, and I think it doesn't make sense, and I think it's much more complicated than it needs to be. I can't wait for blockchain technology to come in and just disrupt that entire industry. But unfortunately, where we are today, you've got to focus on this. This is very important. Insurance is just one part of your asset protection strategy. Don't just think that you're covered with an LLC, with your insurance policy. You've got to have those LLCs in place. You've got to, just like you wouldn't just rely on an LLC without an insurance policy, you shouldn't just rely on an insurance policy without having an LLC. So, there's all different types of asset protection tools that we use out there that I talk about. Insurance does not cover you alone. I know, and sometimes I get on my videos when I talk about how good debt can be a great asset protection tool, people say, well, wealthy people just have umbrella insurance. Well, that is not going to cover you. This is just the first line of defense. There's always gaps. Insurance alone is not sufficient. Don't just trust what your agent says. I have worked with a lot of different insurance agents, and I can promise you that, you can't just trust what they're telling you. They may not know. They're not sitting there reading your policy in and out. They don't understand your situation fully. They're, probably not business owners themselves that you're dealing with unless you're dealing with the person who owns the firm. So don't just trust what the agent says. You've got to verify yourself. This is very, very important. There isn't much that's more important out there than making sure that your wealth is protected. You've got to read the policy. I hate reading insurance policies. I'm a big avid reader. I read every day, but I can tell you one of my least favorite, if not my least favorite thing to read is insurance policies, but I do it. I have read every single policy, every line, footnote in every single policy I have. You've got to read them. The minute you start reading them, you will see how vague they are. You will see how many gaps there are. You will see how you go and ask your agent to clarify something. They have no clue, or what they say kind of seems to contradict with the language. So you have to read the policy. You have to understand what that policy says and where you're covered and where you're not. Always shop around for the best policy and rates. This might mean working with various different agents. So lots of times agents will tell you they're shopping around, but they're really just working with one or two insurance companies for that. You want to shop around yourself because this can get expensive. Probably my second largest business cost besides, things like health insurance premiums is just insurance. I pay a lot of money in insurance every year, from my umbrella policy to all my different policies that I have. So you're going to want to shop that around. The differences can be pretty big as far as, how much you're paying. I can't stress this enough. You've got to read the policy. You've got to understand the limits. Every policy has limits. You are never going to have an insurance policy that just covers every single thing that you could possibly do. So understand those limits, understand the coverage gaps. They will exist in every single policy you will ever come across. You need to understand those. Your agent is not going to tell you about them. I've, ask every single agent I ever work with, what are the gaps? What are the gaps? And they never tell me the full gaps or really even, something that's helpful. So you've got to understand the gaps. You've got to understand the limits, and you've got to have a plan in place to cover the fact that there are limits in every policy. This goes, hand in hand. Don't just assume you're covered. In a lot of cases, if you're someone who owns a boat, you're not necessarily covered. A lot of the policies will have some sort of exclusion for watercraft, for example. So you need to make sure that you get a rider or special policy that covers your watercraft. Don't just assume that, children driving your car are covered. That can be a big risk, right? But, that may or may not be covered in your policy. When you have a business and you have your personal policies, a lot of times you need to be careful that those don't both exclude assets. Like I used to have a business car, and I was, it was never, the language was very vague in both policies about whether or not that was covered. I was never fully comfortable that it was covered in one versus the other. So don't just assume that there's coverage just because you think that there should be. Determine the best deductible. So especially, the wealthier you get, the more you might want to consider self-insuring. And that means basically having a higher deductible. So, you want to maybe think about what deductible makes sense. Higher deductibles should have lower premiums. So don't just take the lowest deductible. You want to think about, maybe a higher deductible makes sense, because especially with an umbrella policy, you're thinking about like worst case scenario. So you're not making a claim for little small accidents here and there. You're making a claim for really catastrophic events in most cases. So it might make sense to have a higher deductible in that case. So think about what's the best deductible for you. You need to decide the right amount of coverage. There's a lot of conflicting thoughts on this out there. If I'm worth, $10 million, does a $5 million, umbrella policy cover me? So there's a lot of different thoughts out there, methodologies used for this. I'll have separate videos in the future where I talk more about this because it's very important. But think about the right amount of coverage. It might not just be, if you've got a net worth of X, that's the coverage you need. You might need more. And, in very few cases, you might need less. But just because your net worth is what it is doesn't mean that that's the coverage you need, or doesn't mean that if you've got a huge net worth, you don't need to go, a little bit higher to try to get close to that. Let's say you have a situation where you have a policy in place and you have, something happen. Don't make small claims on that policy. You're going to kick up your premium a lot the minute you make a claim on any insurance policy. This really applies to any policy you have, whether it's homeowners or whatever. But especially with your umbrella, do not make small claims. Think about, yes, I may be covered here, but I might be better off not making the claim and just paying for it out of pocket because of the increase in your premiums that you'll have. So you never want to make small claims on insurance policies, but especially this applies with umbrella policies. Always reassess the policy after a major life event. So the minute you've got, the thing that concerns me most when I used to work with clients was children that drive cars that you own or provide for them or paid for. So, the minute you have a major life change like that, or, just have children in the first place, if your business model changes or something changes, like you acquire a business or dispose of a business, you have a sell that year, you always want to reassess the policy and you want to let your agent know. And you want to then, review the policies to see if there needs to be some changes. So every major life change, make sure you're looking at those policies again and determining, do I need to change my coverage or the limits or anything about it. So this was just a quick primer on umbrella insurance. Hopefully you have a good understanding of the basics and how it works and can think about whether or not you need a policy. And if you have one, do you have the right policy in place or do you have the right coverage in place? So I'll have future content on this, but also keep in mind, this is just the first step in defense against, asset protection. We have a lot of different tools that I talk about, from good debt, from, LLCs, from LLCs for your passive investments. So make sure you check out my other videos on asset protection, because it's really important that you not only do you want to learn how to build wealth, you want to make sure you're protecting that wealth. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.